right, students, it is time to get lit. Oh, that's not cool to say anymore. That's not cool. Okay, that's not cool to say anymore. All right. Well, be that as it may, we need to look at verbs and their complements so that we can be comfortable with this bit of information. So make sure that you are paying attention. You can pause the video at any time if you'd like to, and make it easier for yourself. Okay, so real quickly, guys, we are talking about verbs and their complements, so we should be able to think through this chart without too much trouble. Under verbs, you can see we have action verbs and we have linking verbs. Two big categories: action verbs, linking verbs. Under action verbs, we have transitive verbs, which carry action across to some other word. And we have intransitive verbs, which do not carry action across to any other words. And then over on the other side of the world, the non-action verbs, we have linking verbs, and they talk about condition or state of being. So the being verbs are easy to find because there's just this list of 8 of them. Am, is, are, was, were, be, being, being is how that should probably not be pronounced. Then you have condition. These are words like taste and smell and sound and appear that sometimes could maybe convey action and sometimes talk about condition. So these are our big categories of verbs. And let's start out by talking about transitive verbs. I'm going to have to move myself around all the time here. Transitive verb transfers action to some other word. So, for example, Eric threw the ball to Jimmy John during the game. Eric is the subject. Threw is the verb. And we want to know, does it kind of give that action to some other word? And in this case, we want to plug into a formula. We ask the subject and verb the question, what? So Eric threw what? Ball answers that question. And so we could say that this is a transitive verb because it transferred that action over to ball. Eric threw what? Threw ball. So here's some examples of what that looks like. You ask subject plus verb plus what, and that tells you if you have a transitive verb. So Timothy gave the award to his aunt for safekeeping. He gave what? He gave the award. That makes the verb gave transitive. Everyone ran the race with great speed. Everyone ran what? They ran race. And so since you have a word to answer that question, you know that the verb is transitive. This one says, please hang your backpack on the hook over there on the wall. The subject of this sentence is actually you. It's that implied or understood you. And you hang what? You hang backpack. And so that means that hang is a transitive verb. So to make a verb transitive, we just have to have an answer to the question, what? And we ask it to the subject and the verb. Now here's important information for you. The word that receives that action from the verb is called the direct object, and it's usually going to be a noun or a pronoun. Sometimes we'll see certain types of phrases can act as the direct object, but usually it's a noun or a pronoun, and it's not going to be an adjective or an adverb. So that should help you find direct objects. Let's look at some examples now of indirect objects. If a sentence has a direct object, then it might have an indirect object. It's not a requirement, but it might be there. If you have a direct object, you can go ahead and check for an indirect object. And remember, both of these, direct objects and indirect objects, these two complements are only with transitive verbs. Okay, they're only action verbs that actually do have a direct object. And if there's a direct object, maybe there's an indirect object. So we have formulas. It's like plugging into a mathematical formula. For the direct object, we say to the subject and verb, we ask the question, what? And then if we find a direct object, we look at our subject and verb and direct object, and we ask the question, to whom or for whom? And that's going to give us the indirect object. So here's what that looks like. Timothy gave Betty the award for safekeeping. So what's our subject? Timothy. What's our verb? Gave. And this is what you just saw, by the way, that popped up here. This word that receives the direct object, we call it the indirect object. And again, a noun or a pronoun, not an adjective or an adverb. So Timothy gave Betty what? Timothy gave what? He gave award. That's the direct object. And then we would say, okay, if we have a direct object, let's go ahead and check and plug into our other formula up here, which simply says Timothy, subject, gave, verb, award, direct object. Timothy gave award to whom? And whatever answers that question would be the indirect object. So Timothy gave award to Betty. So you do it in this order. Find a subject, find a verb, plug it in to find a direct object, and then ask if there's an indirect object. So Timothy gave what? He gave award, and he gave that award to whom? To Betty. Another example, Eric threw me the football yesterday. What did Eric throw? Football. That means it's the direct object. And Eric threw the football to whom? Me. So that makes me the indirect object in that sentence. So just a little overview of our transitive verbs and the type of complements they can have. They can have direct objects. And if there is a direct object, then there's a possibility for an indirect object. So check for both of those things with transitive verbs. We know that if transitive verbs are action verbs that transfer action to the direct object and maybe also have indirect objects, well, intransitive, using this prefix here, is just going to be the opposite. They're still action verbs, but they do not transfer action and they do not have direct objects. So an example of an intransitive verb would be something like this. The river rushed over the dam, destroying as it went. How very dramatic. So we plug into our formula. We want to find if there's a direct object, because if there's a direct object, it's a transitive verb. No direct object, no transitive verb. So the river rushed over the dam, destroying as it went. River rushed, that's our subject and verb. River rushed what? And we don't get a noun or pronoun answer to that question. We get a prepositional phrase, over the dam, but that's not going to be a direct object. Our direct objects are not going to be inside prepositional phrases. So river rushed what doesn't give us an answer. That means that rushed is an intransitive verb in that sentence. Okay? So back to our big picture for verbs. We've got action verbs. Transitive ones have direct objects. Intransitive do not have direct objects. There's no complement for an intransitive verb. So let's move on now to our linking verbs, just to kind of keep us moving and keep it quick. Linking verbs, we said that they can describe condition. Those verbs sometimes look like action verbs, but no action is being conveyed. And then we have being verbs, am, is, are, was, be, blah, 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 blah. Am, is, are, was, were, be, being, been. So let's look at the examples we have of these ones. You have Eric was outside the house last night? Question mark. If a verb does not convey action, then it's a linking verb that tells condition or state of being. All right. So Eric was outside the house last night. Eric is the subject. Was is the verb. It does not convey action. And so this is a linking verb. And this one is telling us state of being. It's just a being verb. It's one of those am, is, are, was, were, be, being, been. Then Eric is the subject of this one. Eric is the man. Eric, subject, is a verb, but it does not convey action. So it's a linking verb. And this one is also state of being. It's just telling us is. It's one of our state of being verbs. And here's an example at the bottom. Eric felt amazing after a good nap. Eric is the subject. Felt is the verb. That's not a being verb, but it is still a linking verb. It's giving us the condition. Eric is not feeling something with his hands, right? He's not doing that action. And since he's not doing that action, it's not an action verb. It's just conveying this condition. He felt amazing. How did he feel? What was his condition? Amazing. And so when you have a verb that doesn't convey action, and it's not a being verb, it could be one of these linking verbs that tells us about condition. Okay. There are other words like this, like I mentioned before. You can say this room smells really funny. That's not action, right? That's just saying the condition of the room. You could also say, I smell something strange, and then it is an action verb. And so especially our words for sense, they could be action verbs or they could be linking verbs telling us about the condition of something. It just depends on how they're used in the sentence. So be aware of that when you're looking for these. Now, that brings us to the kinds of complements that linking verbs can have. Linking verbs can really just have these two different types of complements. By the way, complement, that's one of those words or phrases or clauses that's necessary to complete the meaning of a sentence. We could call them completers, complements. Direct objects and indirect objects are complements for transitive verbs, and linking verbs have their own types of complements. One type of complement is a predicate adjective, and it's an adjective after a linking verb that describes the subject. And then you have your predicate noun, a noun after a linking verb that renames the subject. And so let's look at some examples of these two. Linking verbs, two kinds of complements. Let's go back to our examples we've already looked at before. Eric is the man. Eric is the subject. Is a being verb. And now we're saying, okay, is there an adjective after that being verb that modifies the subject, or is there a noun after that being verb that renames the subject? And in this case, it's this noun. It's man. And since it's a noun that comes after a linking verb that renames the subject, we call it a predicate noun. In the next sentence, Eric felt amazing after a good nap. Eric is the subject again. Felt is the linking verb. And this time we don't have a noun to give us another name for Eric. We have an adjective that tells us about Eric. So a predicate adjective that comes after this linking verb, and it tells us more about the subject. Now, predicate adjectives always have to describe the subject of the sentence. They're not going to be doing any other job in a sentence but describing the subject. So be aware of that as you're looking for those. Okay? Guys, that takes us all the way through just our different types of verbs and our complements. Okay? Different types of verbs. Action and linking verbs, they have their different types of complements, and so we'll need to be aware of those. And I hope that helps you if you're working on IXL or any other types of assignments. I hope that short recap will be helpful to you. All right, see you guys later.